In my field of nursing, we're used to death. We're used to helping people to die with care, with honor, with dignity, but not in this magnitude. Not so many at the same time. Not alone without their families. Not alone without their caregivers.
That nurse, not a nurse at a traditional hospital, but she works at Holyoke Soldiers Home in Massachusetts, and it is the scene of the latest coronavirus tragedy. At least 70 veterans have been killed by the virus since the start of the outbreak just there. Out on Long Island, more than 50 vets who live in a veterans home, they were also killed by COVID. It is all part of a trend with COVID-19. As you know by now, it strikes the most vulnerable populations, nursing homes, long-term care facilities. Just yesterday, we spoke with a nun in Westchester County who has lost at least 3 fellow sisters in her congregation, plus as many as 9 priests. And there are many more deathly ill. You can also add our aging veterans to that list of people most at risk. The VA says more than 400 vets have died from the virus, plus many employees have been complaining about inadequate protective equipment and rationing of things like masks. But the head of the VA denies all that. So it is a he said, he said. My next guest just wrote an in-depth piece that does a deep dive into the issues at the VA, and the headline, How Trump's COVID-19 Failure Betrayed Our Military and Veterans. Associate Editor at RealClearPolitics, A.B. Stoddard, joins me now. And just to give a reminder, if there was a constituency the president repeatedly at rallies says that he has been the voice for and the best friend to, it has been the military.
We will take care of our great veterans like they have never been taken care of before.
It's interesting, A.B., in your piece, you start off with Congressman Seth Moulton. And for folks who don't know, obviously a congressman representing District of Massachusetts, but he's a 4-term and decorated vet who served. And he went to the VA for his care, and he couldn't even get a test. And back in February, he was banging on the drum to say, this isn't adequate here. He treated himself at home, and thankfully he's all right. But as you report, it went even before that. In January, people were saying that the VA was not equipped here with the necessary PPE, et cetera, to treat, obviously, a population that has done more than its part for this country.
It's really such a tragedy, Richard, to see all the promises the president has made. And then to also take into account that the largest government entities that we have are the Department of Defense and the VA. They have the 2 largest budgets and could have brought the most resources to bear to this fight. They knew in January, the New York Times documented an email chain called Red Dawn. Dr. Carter Metcher was on it. He's a top medical advisor at the VA in January, writing that the scale of the outbreak could be so enormous, it was overwhelming to assess, and that they needed to secure personal protective gear for caregivers in the VA. This was a group of people that was communicating throughout the government. And here we have the USS Theodore Roosevelt, where we saw a captain basically fall on his sword and lose his job because he sounded the alarm over his crew getting sick. Before the first death, he said no sailor should have to die because we're not at war. And now we have COVID positive cases on 4 aircraft carriers. We have them ravaging VA homes, killing veterans, nearly 500 now. We've only had 1 death that we know of in the active duty military, but submarines are extremely vulnerable. We see a boot camp now in San Diego with more than 40 positive cases. These are environments very susceptible to spread. All the precautions should have been taken. All of the resources should have been brought to bear. And they weren't, and it's not getting enough attention. It is incredibly frightening what's happening, especially in these VA facilities where more than half the population of the 9 million in the system are over the age of 65. They have underlying conditions related to their service or their age, and they are being cared for by people that do not have protective gear. And the VA stopped telling us when they lost 10 nurses or doctors to COVID. But we know that these veterans are not safe, and the government has failed them. It's the worst failure of the federal government in the history of this country, this response to COVID.
And I don't know if it was the intent at the end of the piece here, but for me, more than upsetting, I was mad when I finished your piece because Dr. Metro, who you mentioned, unlike a hospital president of any of the hospitals in our viewing area who would have gone in front of a camera and said, listen, my nurses and doctors don't have the PPE we need here. Somebody get on the stick, whether it be, name the state capital of somebody that's watching me or Washington, get me the stuff I need. And through shame, if not guilt, somebody would have moved heaven and earth to do this. He couldn't do that. But all the bold-faced names back in January, he said, we've got a storm coming here and we can't do anything. And he didn't even get a response for his efforts. Now, here's the part I don't get. I'm not trying to play shrink on a couch, but if this is a population that Trump loves getting in front of, why wouldn't he, since he's already intercepted, my God, care packages going to hospitals already that the feds have intercepted, why wouldn't he have prioritized this population? And why would he have just let this get ignored? That's the part I still don't understand at the end of it, because purely alien mercenary purposes, this was his constituents. These are the people he likes to speak in front of. Why would he have just been radio silent for vets?
Well, I do make the point after a long list of things he's done to insult them, show hostility and even contempt for decorated veterans in his own administration, like Bob Mueller or Bill Taylor or John Kelly or H.R. McMaster or James Mattis or Lieutenant Colonel Vindman. This president was in denial about this epidemic from day one. He dismissed it a long time. He cost us 6 critical weeks. He continues to mislead us about tests even today, tweeting that we've tested so many people and other countries haven't. We have barely tested 2% of our population. We're behind 42 other nations today in our ability to test our population. He didn't make it a priority, and therefore you saw the Secretary of the VA and the Secretary of the Pentagon not able to come out and sound the alarm because they didn't want to get out in front of their commander-in-chief. It's an incredible tragedy, but you can see in what I documented in the piece, and just because most of your viewers haven't even really seen this in the news yet, a discussion of this, 80 dead at Holyoke, the soldiers' home in Massachusetts. Imagine a terrorist attack killing 80 people. You can see that this came from the top, and it was a dismissal that permeated everything until mid-March.
You touched on a few of them, but I just want to forget the morality for a second, which I think is pretty clear in this. You bullet pointed 3 things why this was beyond the pale, forgetting the right and the wrong. One is, there's a deal. You make a deal with anybody who puts on a uniform, man or woman in this country, that we, through our VA here, will take care of them when they need help. 1. 2, this compromises our national readiness, and we'll talk in a second about what happened on the USS Theodore here, but if you let your troops get sick here, let alone, we'll talk about vets in a second, that's against the national interest from a security standpoint. And you also said the 4th mission of the VA is that they are the nation's backstop when you have civilian hospitals that are in crisis. So this was not just wrong, this was against national interest to let all this happen. So my question is, why was the VA secretary so quiet on this, and by the way, misled Congress when he was forced to testify after you said 17 requests or whatever, till finally he went before him and gave half answers. To that end here, he shouldn't get a pass.
No, it's very interesting. So Secretary Esper at the Pentagon did try to, after initially dragging his feet, get out in front and be communicative about what was going on. He's realistically shut down domestic travel for troops and their family, and he's extended that travel ban. Secretary Wilkie of the VA absolutely hid from this issue, wasn't visible, spoke, even though he's a coronavirus task force member at the White House, has only spoken at 2 of their briefings, has been silent on this issue of rationing personal protective gear. The VA essentially lied. And there were stories coming from the ground from nurses unions and et cetera, patients, families saying there's not enough, we're rationing masks and gowns and our lives are at risk. So are the patients' lives. And so Wilkie bears more, I think, blame than Secretary Esper, but really Secretary Esper, again, in keeping with the messaging coming from the top, since this piece was published, could have said to the president, it's not appropriate for you to demand a commencement speech at West Point for graduation.
In another part of the piece, the division that this has caused, you'd like to think in a crisis we have cohesion, but it's not lost on service members when they see what happened to Captain Crozier. You hear the cheering from the troops, and then you hear the words that come from officials. You even cited polling where the president's underwater with active military, something he hasn't been, to my knowledge, as president here, and there's been a steep decline. So my question at the end is, we still have problems with nursing homes right now, even with all the attention to it. To my knowledge, yours is really the first piece that points a light on what's going on with the VA. Is the cavalry coming, AB? Are they getting everything they need, or are we going to be talking about this in the weeks and months to come as this goes from bad to worse?
That's what's so terrifying, Richard. These numbers are unacceptable. Out of Soldiers Home and other facilities around the country, one in Louisiana with more than 53 deaths. The Massachusetts government is now looking at whether or not they're looking into investigation at Soldiers Home, whether or not legal action might be required. This is such an incredible failure. I really do hope it gets enough attention in every way possible. And I thank you for highlighting it.
No, listen, I'll end with how you ended your piece, because this goes beyond any politics or partisanship silliness. It's both active duty and veterans deserve a whole lot better than this, and there's been dereliction of duty from the top down. AB, great piece here, and hopefully, as you said, more people are going to get on this. Hopefully that will bring the attention it so desperately deserves. I appreciate the time.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Well, tomorrow, we're going to stay on this subject. A decorated veteran, retired Navy SEAL. He'll join us to discuss the situation with our vets. He's also got the perspective from Washington. Former Nebraska Senator Bob Kerrey. He'll weigh in on tomorrow's show. And up next, as we know, the situation with coronavirus, it changes every day, sometimes even by the hour. So how do colleges and universities make decisions about how they're going to handle next semester? It's only a few months away. Well, after the break, a college president will join us to discuss the challenges that they're facing about how and when to open their doors.